Opened it. It didn't take long to find the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. Zero. Not low, not uncertain, 0. For a moment, the world went genuinely quiet. That specific kind of quiet where your brain has absorbed a fact but hasn't yet figured out how to distribute it to the rest of your nervous system. Every memory I had of Ethan did this awful, involuntary thing, rearranging itself, not disappearing, just refiling. Every story I'd read him at bedtime, every Saturday morning he'd climbed into my side of the bed to watch cartoons, every time he'd called me Dad. All of it still happened, all of it was still real, and none of it was biologically mine.
Some families are built on love, loyalty, and mutual respect. Mine was built on favorites. And spoiler alert, I was not the favorite. My name is Jason. I grew up in a 2-story house on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, where the summers were brutal, the cicadas were deafening, and the family dynamics were somehow even louder than the bugs. My dad drove long-haul trucks for a living, which meant he was gone more often than he was home. And my mom, well, she had a system. A very clear, very deliberate, absolutely rigged system. My younger brother Kyle, 3 years my junior, was the golden child. Full stop, no debate. The boy could sneeze and she'd appear out of nowhere with a warm blanket, a bowl of soup, and what I can only describe as the energy of someone who had just been handed a newborn puppy. Meanwhile, I could be on fire, and she'd glance over, say, "You're the older one, you'll figure it out," and go back to her shows. I'm not being dramatic. I wish I was. If Kyle forgot his homework, she'd drive it to his school like she was personally delivering diplomatic mail. If I forgot mine, she'd say, and I quote, "Maybe you'll remember next time." Then she'd turn the TV back up. I was making my own sandwiches at age 7, doing my own laundry at 9, getting myself to school, while downstairs, Kyle was having his crusts cut off and his soda poured into a frosted glass like a tiny king receiving tribute. Now, here's the thing about growing up as the responsible one in a family that doesn't actually give you any credit for it. You don't just feel invisible, you feel replaceable. Like your furniture that nobody picked out on purpose. You're just there, filling up space until someone notices they need a lamp. And Kyle? He noticed. He clocked every crack in my armor before I even knew I had one. By the time he was in primary school, the teasing had already started. Classic sibling stuff at first, hiding my trainers, nicking the last biscuit, general annoyance. But Kyle wasn't wired like a normal, annoying little brother. He was wired like a tiny sociopath with excellent observational skills. He'd go through my room when I wasn't home, not to steal anything obvious, just to look, to learn, to file information away for later use. I had a notebook, one of those battered exercise books where I used to scribble thoughts I couldn't say out loud. Stupid stuff, really. Poems, crushes, fears about the future, completely private. The kind of thing a teenage lad puts all his most embarrassing emotions into because there's nowhere else to put them. Kyle found it. He didn't just read it, he read it aloud at breakfast, with my mom at the table. She laughed, not a lot, just enough. That was the moment I understood the rules of my household. Kyle could do whatever he wanted, and the adults in the room would let it slide because he was Kyle. Lovable, charming, untouchable Kyle. And I was just Jason, the one who was supposed to handle it, the one who would eventually handle it, just not in the way any of them expected. There's a point in every sibling rivalry where it stops being a rivalry and starts being something darker. Most people don't spot it until it's already gone too far. I didn't spot it until there was a lit lighter behind my head. Let me back up. By secondary school, Kyle had upgraded from petty annoyance to what I can only describe as calculated psychological warfare. He'd identified every single thing that embarrassed me, every social weakness, every raw nerve, and he used them strategically, like he had a spreadsheet somewhere labeled Jason's Vulnerabilities, a working document. At school, I was already the quiet kid with glasses who got targeted by a few older lads who thought that was funny. Normal enough, unfortunately. What wasn't normal was my own brother pulling those same lads aside in the corridor and feeding them material. He'd whisper things like, "Ask him about the time he cried at a Disney film," or "He still uses a nightlight, by the way." And then he'd sit back and watch the show with a grin on his face like he'd just produced the whole thing. I want you to understand something. This wasn't just bullying. This was my little brother actively constructing my social humiliation from the inside out. Most people's enemies are strangers. Mine shared a bathroom with me. And then came the moment that crossed every line that exists. I was at my desk one night, working on a history assignment. The house was quiet. Dad was on the road, Mum was watching telly downstairs, and Kyle crept into my room so quietly I didn't hear him until I noticed it. A flicker of orange light near my shoulder, the smell of butane. He was holding a lighter to the back of my head, not close enough to touch, close enough that I could feel the heat and hear the faint sizzle of my hair at the edges. I shot up so fast my chair went flying. My heart was absolutely hammering, and Kyle just laughed. He stood there properly creasing like he'd pulled off the best prank of his life. Mum came in first. "Oh, relax, Jason. He was just playing around." And then, for once, Dad walked in right behind her. He just got back from a long-haul run, still smelling like diesel and motorway coffee. He looked at me, he looked at the lighter, he looked at Kyle, and something in his face went very, very still. "Enough," he said. That single word landed harder than anything I'd heard in that house in years. The next morning, Dad pulled me aside while Mum fussed over Kyle's breakfast. We sat at the old picnic table in the garden, the wood all rough and sun-bleached, and he said something I genuinely didn't expect. "Kyle's becoming a bully, and it's not your fault." I'd never heard anyone say that to me before, that it wasn't my fault. Something cracked open in my chest when he said it. Not painfully, more like a window that'd been sealed shut, finally popping open. That week, he drove me to a local MMA gym tucked between a pawn shop and a taco place. The walls were covered in faded fight posters. It smelled like effort and disinfectant. And for the first time in my life, I started building something Kyle couldn't touch. 6 months of showing up to that gym every week, and I barely recognized myself. Not in a cheesy movie montage kind of way, though I won't lie, the physical transformation was significant. Shoulders broader, arms like I actually used them, posture that said, "I know what I'm doing," instead of "please don't notice me." But more than the physical stuff, something had shifted in how I moved through the world. That permanent low-grade anxiety I'd been carrying since childhood, the constant sense of bracing for impact, started to go quiet. Kyle noticed immediately, and I could tell it absolutely ruined him. He still threw out his usual digs, sarcastic comments about my clothes, little jabs at dinner, but now when he did it, I'd just look at him. Calm, level, not reacting, not flinching, and I watched something behind his eyes go slightly wrong, like a machine that expected one result and kept getting another. He didn't know what to do with a version of me that wasn't rattled. Good. But the real test came on a Saturday afternoon when I found my money missing. I'd been saving up for months, mowing lawns, helping a neighbor shift boxes during a house move, every bit of cash carefully folded and kept in an envelope in my desk drawer. It was supposed to go toward a used car, my first one, a small thing to most people, a massive deal to me. I opened the drawer and the envelope was gone. I didn't need a detective. I found Kyle out the front of the house leaning against his mate's beat-up old Mustang, laughing with a soda in one hand and my cash, visibly in the other. "Where's my money?" I asked. He smirked. "What are you going to do about it? Run to daddy like the little loser you've always been?" And here's where years of MMA training proved genuinely useful. One clean right hook, his head snapped back, he crumpled. I reached into his pocket, took my money back, and walked away without saying another word. No dramatic speech, no lengthy confrontation, just consequences served efficiently. After that, Kyle kept his distance.
physically. If I walked into a room, he found a reason to leave it. The hallway standoffs became silent and quick, his eyes flickering away before he could even get the smirk fully assembled. It wasn't peace. It was a ceasefire built entirely on the fact that he now understood I could back it up. And honestly, I was already done with that chapter anyway. I had a plan, and it was called college. I got into a uni in San Marcos, far enough from Austin to feel like a completely different life, close enough that I could still get home if something happened to Dad. My first night in that dorm, on a mattress that felt like someone had wrapped cardboard in a fitted sheet, I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, grinning like an idiot. No Kyle, no favoritism, no lighter behind my head. Just me and the quiet. I should have enjoyed it longer before I walked into the party where I met Emily. But we'll get to that.
I almost didn't go to that party. Genuinely, I had my trainers on, decided the whole thing sounded exhausting, took them off, then put them back on again because my flatmate guilt-tripped me into it. Classic. Life-altering decisions made entirely out of social obligation. The party was exactly what you'd expect. Cramped, loud, someone's terrible playlist, mystery punch in a communal bowl that I absolutely did not touch. I was in the kitchen, nursing a bottle of water, silently calculating how soon I could leave without being rude, when I saw her. She was leaning against the counter with a red cup in her hand, laughing at something someone had said. The kind of laugh that doesn't perform for the room. It's just real, just hers. She had this way of listening to people like she was actually tracking every word, not just waiting for her turn to talk. We ended up talking for 3 hours. About music first, then books, then family. Hers warm and uncomplicated, mine sounding like the synopsis for a true crime documentary. She didn't flinch, she didn't give me the pity face, she just listened, and then asked questions that showed she'd actually absorbed what I said. Her name was Emily. I walked her back to her halls that night, and when she smiled at me at the door, I felt something I'd been running low on for a very long time. Safe. By junior year, we were living off campus together above a coffee shop that pumped espresso fumes through the building 24/7. The place was cramped and slightly damp, and we genuinely did not care. We talked about the future like it was already decided. Careers, a house, maybe kids one day. The kind of conversations that feel like building something real. Summer before graduation, Emily found out she was pregnant. Her family was religious, traditional, and very much of the opinion that things should be done properly. I bought a modest ring, spent 3 weeks quietly agonizing over it in jewelry shops, proposed in the park where we'd had our first picnic, and 2 months later we were married in a small church with both families crammed into the pews. It felt like proof. Proof that the rubbish I'd come from hadn't ruined me, that I could actually build something stable and good. We moved back to Austin, into a modest house on a quiet street where the loudest thing was the mail van rattling past in the afternoons. We had a son. We called him Ethan. We had a routine, a rhythm, a life that fit together in all the ways I'd always wanted. I was so relieved to have stability that I stopped paying close attention to the cracks. And the cracks, as it turned out, had been there for years. Here's the thing about being betrayed by someone you trust completely. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives in tiny, unremarkable details that your brain files away under probably nothing because the alternative is too horrifying to consider. The phone she always kept face down. The conversations that stopped the second I walked into a room. The late nights at work that always seemed to line up with Kyle being unavailable. Probably nothing. Absolutely everything. Here's something nobody tells you about discovering your partner is cheating. Your brain fights it hard. Your brain has a vested interest in the status quo. It's built a whole life around this person. It's got sunk costs. So when the red flags start arriving, it works overtime to spin innocent explanations for every single one of them. Late nights? She's ambitious. She's always been a grafter. Phone always locked? Everyone values privacy. Flinches when I hug her? She's tired. We've both been tired. You become your own gaslighter. It's genuinely impressive, if absolutely horrifying in retrospect. The phone stuff started small. face down on the dinner table, buzzing occasionally, her glancing at it with the kind of expression you make when you're deciding whether to answer. If I walked into a room unexpectedly, the screen would lock in one smooth motion and disappear under her leg. One night I woke up at 2 in the morning to the faint click of her typing beside me. She was propped up on one elbow, screen glowing blue, biting her lip while she typed fast. When she felt me stir, she clicked it off and turned away. I told myself she was probably just on a work group chat. Then there were the family barbecues. We do these big Sunday gatherings at my parents' place. Everyone there, the full cast. And I started noticing Emily and Kyle in corners of the garden I hadn't put them in. Heads close together, voices low, the body language of two people who were not having a casual family chat. The second I'd walk over, the conversation would fold up neatly and vanish. Emily would smile, Kyle would crack a joke, and I'd stand there feeling like I'd walked in on something without being able to prove what. But then my cousin Sarah called me. Sarah and I had grown up close but drifted in that way adult cousins do. Christmas cards, occasional catch-ups, and now, apparently, life-altering phone calls over lunch at a Greasy Spoon diner. She was fidgety, couldn't quite look me straight, coffee mug in both hands like she needed the anchor. She told me she'd been at the last barbecue and had ducked inside to use the bathroom, passing through the kitchen where she'd heard voices, Emily and Kyle, low and tense. And she heard Emily say, clearly enough that Sarah had stopped walking and pressed herself against the wall, "What if he's yours? What if they find out?" The diner noise kept going around us. Plates scraping, someone ordering chips, normal world sounds that felt completely absurd in that moment. I didn't say anything for a bit, just sat with it, turned the words over. What if he's yours? There was only one person that sentence could be about. Ethan, my son. My chest did something I don't have a clean word for, like a trapdoor opening somewhere inside it. Every single memory I had of Ethan suddenly rearranged itself in my head. Not replaced, not erased, just held differently, cautiously, with a terrible asterisk attached. Sarah told me she'd wrestled with it for weeks. "I couldn't just not tell you," she said, "but I'm so sorry." I told her she'd done the right thing. I meant it. And then I drove home, waited for Emily and Ethan to go to sleep, and sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, a legal pad, and the particular kind of calm that comes right before everything changes.
I want to be very clear about something. I did not blow up my life based on a whispered sentence at a barbecue. I am a methodical man. I trained in an MMA gym for years. I know the difference between emotional reaction and calculated action. Emotional reaction gets you in trouble. Calculated action gets you evidence. So I sat at that kitchen table at midnight and I worked. Bank statements first. Pages and pages of transactions I'd never bothered to look at closely because, and this is genuinely funny in hindsight, I trusted my wife. Hotel charges in Dallas, a couple in San Antonio, dates that lined up precisely with evenings Emily had told me she was working late for a client pitch. Uber receipts showing pickups in locations nowhere near her office. It was all just sitting there in the statements, completely unbothered, waiting for someone to look. Then I pulled the phone records, not the messages themselves, but the logs, timestamps, duration, frequency. Kyle's number showed up in long calls and text bursts, several of them starting well after midnight. They spiked around holidays, around family gatherings, around Ethan's birthday every single year. That last one sat in my stomach like a stone. Then the shared credit card. Dinner charges for two at restaurants I'd never visited. Charged on weekends when I'd been at home with Ethan while Emily was supposedly doing errands. I mapped it all out on the legal pad. Dates, locations, amounts. The pattern that emerged wasn't a coincidence. It was architecture. Carefully maintained, consistently executed, built around my routine and my blind spots. This had been going on for 5 years. 5 years of Sunday dinners where Kyle sat across the table from me. 5 years of Emily laughing at my jokes and telling me she was happy. 5 years of me tucking Ethan in at night and calling myself his dad. I closed the laptop.
My hands were shaking, not from panic, from the particular kind of anger that comes after grief has already moved through you and left something colder behind. The next morning, I called my best mate from secondary school, Dom. Dom happened to be a solicitor, the kind of person you want on your side when the floor drops out. I rang him, told him I needed to meet, and he told me to come by his office after hours, no questions asked. I spread everything out on his desk. Every statement, every log, every receipt. He listened without interrupting, jaw tightening as the pile grew. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Right, you need a family law specialist, someone who handles high-conflict divorces and knows how to protect your assets before this thing explodes." The next day, I was in a conference room with a divorce lawyer who looked like she ate complicated cases for breakfast. Within an hour, we'd filed for a court-ordered paternity test, opened a separate bank account in my name only, canceled every joint card, and started building a custody and property case that left nothing to chance. Emily and Kyle thought they'd been running a flawless operation for 5 years. They had absolutely no idea I'd just counter-launched. I waited for a Friday night when Ethan was at a sleepover. Emily was on the sofa with her phone and the telly on low. Completely ordinary scene, the kind of evening we'd had 1,000 times. And I stood in the doorway for a moment, folder in hand, heart rate completely steady, and said, "We need to talk." Something in my voice made her look up. I watched it cross her face, that flicker of recognition. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. The brief, terrible moment where a person realizes the road they thought was clear has just developed a very large obstacle. I sat across from her and started laying documents on the coffee table, one by one. No big speech, no dramatic revelation, just papers sliding across the surface with quiet certainty. Bank statements with hotel charges, credit card bills from restaurants we'd never been to together, phone logs with Kyle's number lighting up at all hours, every receipt, every timestamp. She kept her face neutral at first, scanning each page like she was looking for a loophole, something she could point to and say, "This doesn't mean what you think it means." I watched her jaw tighten. I watched the color drain from her face by degrees. I said, "Explain this." Her first move was denial. "These don't prove anything. You're reading into it." I didn't respond, just waited. Then came the blame. "You're always working, Jason, always focused on yourself. When did you ever actually pay attention to whether I was happy?" She said it with genuine heat, like my failure to be omniscient about her emotional state was somehow a reasonable justification. It was actually almost impressive, that pivot, the whole "you made me do this" machinery cranking into gear. I let her run it. Then I watched the moment it ran out of fuel. Her posture changed, shoulders dropping. She looked at her hands, turning her wedding ring slowly, and then, very quietly, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Not "nothing happened," not "you've misunderstood." It wasn't supposed to happen like this, which is the vocabulary of someone who's had a plan that went sideways, not someone who's been falsely accused. "How long?" I asked. She met my eyes. "Years." I reached back into the folder and placed 2 envelopes on the table between us. "The first one," I said, "is your divorce papers. You've been served." She opened her mouth. I placed the second envelope beside the first. "The second is a court order for a paternity test. We're going to find out the truth about Ethan." She stared at me like I'd started speaking in a different language. "You can't be serious." "If you love Ethan," she started. "I love my son," I said, "but I need to know if he's mine." I stood up and left the room. I didn't slam doors, didn't shout, didn't throw anything. I'd already done every single thing I needed to do. Now, I just had to wait for an envelope. And when it came, it was going to change everything. The envelope arrived by certified mail, the kind that requires your signature. I sat at the kitchen table for a full minute, just looking at it. My name on the label, printed clean and official. Inside, a few sheets of paper that were either going to confirm everything or unravel everything. I opened it. It didn't take long to find the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0. Not low, not uncertain, 0. For a moment, the world went genuinely quiet. That specific kind of quiet where your brain has absorbed a fact but hasn't yet figured out how to distribute it to the rest of your nervous system. Every memory I had of Ethan did this awful, involuntary thing, rearranging itself, not disappearing, just refiling. Every story I'd read him at bedtime, every Saturday morning he'd climbed into my side of the bed to watch cartoons, every time he'd called me Dad. All of it still happened, all of it was still real, and none of it was biologically mine. I gave myself about 10 minutes to sit with that. Then I picked up my keys. My parents were at their kitchen table when I arrived, having a perfectly ordinary afternoon coffee. I asked them to stay seated. I pulled out my phone, put it on speaker, and dialed Kyle. He picked up on the third ring. Cocky tone, completely unbothered. "What's up, big bro?" "I know about you and Emily," I said. "I have proof. And I know Ethan is yours." A pause. Then, and I will never stop being darkly impressed by this, he laughed. "Look, it's not my fault if she came to me. You were boring, man. She wanted someone who could actually make her feel alive." He was actually warming up to it now, like he'd been waiting years to say this. "She told me she wished she'd met me first. You were just the safe option, the backup plan." I looked at my parents. My dad's jaw had gone rigid. My mum had gone completely pale. Kyle kept going, digging himself deeper with every word, clearly unaware that he was performing his own demolition live in front of both parents. My dad said quietly, "What you've done isn't just a betrayal of your brother. It's a betrayal of this entire family." Kyle tried to deflect. "Come on, Dad, don't be dramatic." "Starting today," Dad said, with that particular flat finality reserved for moments of absolute seriousness, "I'm cutting you off. No more tuition, no more rent, no more safety net." "You can't do that," Kyle's voice cracked, real panic bleeding through for the first time. "I'm your son too." "You made your choice." Dad hung up. We sat in silence for a moment. Then my mum did something she'd never done in my entire life. She turned to me and apologized. Not for Kyle, for herself, for enabling him, for looking the other way, for years of letting it happen while I just absorbed it. "I can't fix the past, but I'm not choosing him over you anymore." I didn't cry, but I won't pretend it didn't hit me. The golden child had just lost everything, and he hadn't even realized the worst part was still coming. I honestly thought after the phone call, Kyle would retreat, lick his wounds, disappear for a while into whatever corner of humiliation he'd landed in. I underestimated how badly his ego was going to malfunction under pressure. A week later, my security camera pinged. I opened the app, and there he was on my front porch, pacing in circles, hands moving like he was rehearsing a speech that was never going to be as good as the one in his head. Hair a mess, face flushed, the energy of someone who'd been running on grievance fumes and absolutely nothing else for several days. I could have ignored it. Technically, the smart move was to ignore it. I opened the door. He got in my face immediately, launched straight into the exact same script he'd been running since we were kids. The one where I'm the pathetic one, the loser, the one who ruined everything for everyone. "Emily never loved you," he said. "She told me you were boring. She only stayed because you were the safe option." Then he twisted it. "And that kid you've been raising, he calls me dad now." I want to be honest with you. That one landed. That one was designed to land. He knew exactly what he was doing when he said it. Something in my chest just caught on it. But here's the thing about years of MMA training. You don't just learn to punch. You learn to absorb a hit and stay functional. He lunged first, shoved me hard in the chest, and then training absolutely took over. I sidestepped his swing, landed a clean jab to his jaw, followed with a hook that sent him stumbling backward into the porch railing. He charged again, wild, messy, nothing behind it, and I caught him, drove my knee into his midsection, and shoved him back. "Get off my property," I said, volume perfectly normal, breathing steady. Blood running from his nose, eyes glassy. "I'm calling the police. You assaulted me for no reason." 2 days later, officers knocked on my door. I invited them in, made them a cup of tea, and handed them my security footage. The footage showed Kyle arriving uninvited. The footage showed Kyle threatening me. The footage showed Kyle making the first physical move. Case closed. Self-defense. No charges. But the public fallout was something else entirely. Within weeks, Kyle had dropped out of university. Couldn't afford the fees without Dad's money. He was hauling timber on a construction site through the Texas summer heat, 12-hour days baked into the job. Friends told me he was at a petrol station at dawn most mornings, hunched over a bad coffee, clothes dusty with drywall. Emily juggling shifts, pushing a trolley full of value brand groceries. Their social media had gone completely silent. No more restaurant photos, no more holiday snaps. Just the quiet of people who've been ground down by the consequences of their own choices. And then my dad called me over for a meeting. The kind of meeting with documents. The kind of documents with numbers on them that made Kyle's situation permanent. Dad's study smelled like old oak and his signature aftershave, the same one he'd worn my entire life. We sat across from each other at the heavy desk, and he slid a folder across to me without preamble. "I've been thinking about the future," he said. "After everything Kyle's done, I can't justify leaving him anything significant." I opened the folder. Inside were his updated will documents, the house, the investment portfolio, the retirement accounts. Roughly $1 million in total, all going to me. Kyle's inheritance had been reduced to exactly 100 pounds. Not nothing. Legally, that's significant. Just enough to make the change airtight. I looked up at him. "Are you sure about this?" He didn't hesitate. "You earned my trust. He squandered his." It took about a week for Kyle to find out. Somehow, it always does. My phone rang. I answered because at that point I was genuinely curious how he was going to play it. "Look," he said, voice straining for casual. "I know we've had our differences, but family's supposed to stick together, right? Maybe you could talk to Mom and Dad, just get them to reconsider." I laughed, genuinely, out loud. "Funny," I said, coming from the bloke who stuck it to my wife instead. "It was a mistake," his voice sharpened. "You can't hold this over me forever." "Kyle," I said evenly, "you made your choice. Live with it. Don't call me again." And then, for the first and only time in my life, I heard my brother break. Not physically, not dramatically, just a crack in the voice. The sound of someone who has finally, after a lifetime of never facing consequences, run directly into a wall they cannot charm, manipulate, or cry their way through. I hung up. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Texas fault laws worked in my favor, and the documented evidence of the affair gave my lawyer significant leverage. Emily walked away with her personal belongings and whatever fit into Kyle's car. I kept the house, the savings, the retirement accounts. When I turned my key in the front door after the final court date, the house felt different, lighter. Every room exactly as I'd left it, but somehow more mine than it ever had been. I won't pretend the Ethan situation is simple. It isn't. He's a little boy who did nothing wrong, and somewhere in all of this, I hope he ends up better than both his biological parents deserve to give him. I loved that kid. I still think about him. That part of it doesn't resolve neatly, and I won't insult you by pretending it does. But as for Kyle and Emily, they built their life together out of years of lies. Now they're living it. Cramped flat, stretched thin, no safety net, no charm offensive left to run, no audience for the golden child performance. Sometimes karma is a courtroom, sometimes it's a DNA test. Sometimes it's just watching someone finally have to deal with the person they actually are, without anyone around to carry them. I wake up in a quiet house now. No eggshells, no pretending, no wondering what's happening behind my back. I'm at peace. Genuinely. And honestly, That's the best revenge there is.